Guys, there's 4 teams that I've seen thrown around already next year. They had varying results this year. I'd say all of them were positive, especially towards the end of the season. And all 4 of them, because of those positive ends to the season, have started to be thrown around in the top 20, top 15, top 10, even in some way too early polls this year. So I'm going to give you 4 teams. And I want you guys to tell me if you had to place a futures bet or just buy stock right now in these 4 teams, who are you doing it with? We've got Illinois, Michigan, Nebraska, and Minnesota.
That's a doozy.
Illinois has been as high as like number 6 in some preseason top 10, some way too early top 25s.
I think my skepticism with Illinois for next year is didn't they lose both Franklin and Bryant? Or am I making that up? Like I think that's a piece that a lot of people are overlooking. I know they're bringing a lot back, but having to replace 2 game-breaking wide receivers it's kind of hard to do. And it's not like we're talking about Ohio State's receiver room here where it's just next man up. Like, this is Illinois, guys. Like, I'm not intimately familiar with their roster to be like, oh my gosh, look for this guy. He's going to be great. But I think there should be a little bit more skepticism with how they've kind of produced or lack thereof receiver production over the last 5 to 10 years or so. So, I mean, if they do find that, I think they certainly have the pieces. They have the quarterback. Their offensive line should be really good next year. I think they're bringing back their top 3 rushers, and they're bringing back a ton on defense too. So I understand why people are high on Illinois. I don't know if I'm ready to sit here and say this is a playoff team. I would like to see what the kind of the bodies that they have out wide look like. But I think if we're talking about a team that's going to do the Indiana kind of come from nowhere and make a playoff run, I think I would go Nebraska. You have the quarterback. He has the pedigree. You have to think he's going to take a big step forward next year. And I really love the receivers that they brought in. Like, they have given him some legitimate weapons. And the defense, I mean, you lose your defensive coordinator, you're losing some guys on that defense. Maybe that takes a bit of a step back. But I do think that their offense, especially with Holgerson having already been in that building now, assuming the offensive coordinator reigns for next year, I think that offense has potential to take a big step forward next year.
Well, to not be redundant, I think Ryan is a wise pick with Nebraska. I think for long term, my bet would probably be Michigan, right? With what we talked about with Underwood, the tackles there. If you want something for 2025, I like Illinois a ton. I wonder if all this hype is something that you just buy a little too much in on yourself. And I don't know, Brett Bielema was a really good coach. I'm sure he can find his way around that. Ryan already mentioned the receivers that are gone that were very beneficial. You do get Altmaier back. They play really good defense. You get Ohio State in Champaign. As a Buckeye fan, that breaks me. 2007, Juice Williams knocked off the undefeated Jim Tressel-led Ohio State Buckeyes. So, I have a little fear and hesitancy going back to that Illabuck game there. But I'm pushing it a little forward. I don't know if I'm going to say playoff-esque, but maybe a 10-win. So I'm looking at Minnesota. I have their schedule pulled up right now, and some people have talked about it a little bit, but you start with Buffalo, Northwestern State, at Cal, who no longer has Mendoza. I know they have Devin Brown now. Then you get Rutgers. I think that's a winnable game. That's home. You go to Ohio State, so we're going to say that's a loss. Purdue, what's Purdue going to be? They're still laying on the doormat. You're going to have to fight one with Nebraska, but you get them at home. At Iowa could be tough. We'll see if Iowa's defense kind of gets back to where they need to be versus can the offense keep progressing. Michigan State, we saw it with Aiden Childs this year. It's a roller coaster ride. You don't know what you're going to get there. At Oregon's going to be stout. So that's, let's say, your second loss. But at Northwestern, you draw Wisconsin at home. And as much as I love Luke Fickell, I don't know where Wisconsin is. They have 2 viable quarterbacks in the room this year to fight it out to get the starting spot. But I could see a 9-3, 10-2 at best season for Minnesota. Dear God, if they pull off an upset at Ohio State or at Oregon, that would be mind-boggling. But outside of those 2 games, every game is winnable. They've got to hit on quarterback again. I'm blanking on the young man's name, but he's coming from, I believe, South Dakota State. He's a pretty prolific passer. You got to get going a little faster than Brosmer did this year. And Ryan and I had a live show going on during the North Carolina game, and I think I'd rather watch paint dry than tune into that game. You have to keep Darius Taylor healthy. You're losing your defensive coordinator, so that's a big change. But flex a consistent coach. I like what Minnesota has. compared to a favorable schedule for 2025. They hit 8 wins last year, and their over-under was 5.5. So if you're going to walk in this year and tell me they're 6.5, I'm going to take the over on that and say 9 wins probably.
You're looking, there's in these mega conferences, there's always going to be a team or two that you can find a path schedule-wise. And I think you guys hit the two of them. Nebraska has a favorable schedule as well. You guys are speaking my language, hyping up the Cornhuskers. I've been wanting them to return to prominence for quite some time. Yeah, and I love what they've got going on. I've always loved Matt Rule as a coach too. I think he's a great fit for Nebraska. They've really started to open up the Texas pipeline just a little bit too. It's starting to crack back open just a little bit, and that's really what got them going in some of their Big 12 days, is getting some talent that maybe some of the bigger names in Texas overlooked, and they're starting to show up with some of those guys, especially in the Metroplex again. So look out for Nebraska. That's who I would put the money on as well. Guys, I have a tier with Iowa, Rutgers, and Northwestern that I just named Iowa, Rutgers, and Northwestern. If you guys have any strong thoughts or think that things are going to look a little different at either of those three schools, I'm happy to slow down here, but they kind of are what they are to me, and that's not a bad thing. I think that they are just kind of who they are, and we can move on if you guys want to.
I was going to say, I think the biggest thing for Iowa, get the defense back to what it was, and you're losing Caleb Johnson. That's a massive hit. Outside of Genty, even in the argument with Genty, best running back in the country this year, only shut down, I believe, by Ohio State, essentially, outside of one run. Like, that's your whole offense you've lost. Talk about another team that doesn't produce wide receivers. Tight ends, absolutely. Wide receivers, I don't know. You said Northwestern, and who else was in that? Rutgers? Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't have much to say for them. Maybe Ethan Kaliak-Manis in his 6th year can work some Scarlet Knight magic, but other than that, I mean, Monangai's gone. Talk about another running back that's gone out of the Big Ten, ton to replace. And Northwestern, I'm just looking forward to seeing your stadium by the lake again.
I think I talked myself into Rutgers being that surprise 9-win team this year because of this schedule, and they did not do that. And now I don't ever want to talk about Rutgers again until they show that they deserve to be talked about. So I'm with you. We could just skip these teams.
Yeah, again, not bad. They are who they are, and Rutgers making bowls consistently is a huge win for Greg Schiano. But Iowa, yeah, just feels like they've kind of hit the plateau. They had an offense this year that was fun, but can't have an offense without the defense if you're going to be Iowa and expect to win a ton of games.
Gracious him! How about that?